Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. Today we are going to be answering some questions on minimalism. So I get quite a lot of questions, particularly on my videos on this channel, about minimalism and my approach to it. And so I wanted to respond to those burning questions about minimalism. So I asked you guys on Instagram to send me over some of your questions. And so in this video I have collated some of the most common questions. A lot of them were repeated, so in order to answer multiple of them I've just kind of condensed them into one more unified question that generally is applied to lots of them. So I have boiled it down to about 7 questions, and in this video we are going to be answering them, so let's jump right in. So the first question I got, and I get this question quite a lot, was do you need to have a minimalist aesthetic to be minimalist? And short answer is no. So the history behind minimalism is that, yes, it was originally an art design movement. I think it came from the 60s, and it was a response to expressionism, which is great because I feel like expressionism is one extreme and minimalism is the other, and when the world gives us one thing, it also then counteracts it with another thing that is opposing, to kind of pull us back into alignment down the middle line. So that's where minimalism comes from. It's kind of a balancing act. So although minimalism was originally an art and design movement, it's also a way of living, which is a little bit more modern, and that is generally what I feel that most minimalists are referring to when they talk about being minimalist. It's not so much the design aesthetic as it is the way of living, and that's what I categorize myself as well. It's definitely an intentional way of living over an aesthetic. So of course you can value both the design and the intentional living. You can have both of them, but they're not both necessarily inextricably linked. Now you might be asking why a lot of minimalist like lifestylers then have quite a pared down, muted, monochrome look, especially when it comes to wardrobe. And although a lot of the time that is for design preference, I think that the main reason for that, and for me certainly, is that it's just easier to then have fewer items. So for example, in the wardrobe, if you only have black, white, grey and muted tones, then everything goes with everything and it's a lot quicker to get dressed. You don't need that many items. If you just have like a black top, a white top and a grey top, it's gonna go with whatever bottoms you have. If you have lots of colours, then they might clash and patterns might clash, and then you might end up actually having more items in your wardrobe. So having a muted, pared down and monochromatic wardrobe actually lends itself a lot easier to simpler living. But that is not to say that you can't have colour and pattern in your wardrobe. Absolutely, you can still have those things and be minimalist, because you don't have to have the design aesthetic to be minimalist. A minimalist lifestyler, like I said before, is just about having fewer items, not necessarily having just black, white and grey in your wardrobe. You can absolutely have very few items, just the necessities, just what you love, and if those items that you love happen to be really colourful and loud and bold and full of pattern, then that's great too. You can absolutely have that. So for example, my taste generally is black, white and grey. That just has happened to always been my taste. I like the muted tones, but I do also like pops of colour here and there. You guys would have seen in my wardrobe tour and even my living room tour, I have lots of muted colours, but then I also have some reds and some yellows and some oranges just kind of interdispersed throughout as well, just because I find that I really like those items, and I don't think that that makes me any less minimalist than someone who just has white everything. You can paint your walls blue or red or pink or orange or purple, and it's not less minimalist than someone who has white walls. You have the same amount of walls and they're just in a different color. So you can just have whatever taste you have and still be minimalist. You don't have to change it to fit into this box of what you think a minimalist home should look like. It should reflect you and your personality and your tastes without having to give up that flavor that you have. as long as those items are still minimalist in intention, that you don't have too much of something, that you don't have an abundance of something that you could probably live with fewer of. As long as it's minimalist in intention, I don't think it matters what color or design or pattern it is. The second question I got was, what do you find the hardest thing about being a minimalist, and also how did you overcome it? Now, I had to think about this one quite a lot, because minimalism for me, the way that I approach it is that it's not overwhelmingly difficult. Of course it has its challenges, but it's not super hard, and I haven't pushed myself to extremes in order to live this like perfect minimalist lifestyle. So I definitely think that the hardest thing for me in my life and in my lifestyle and where I live is doing the things that I love outdoors. So because I live in London, which is a huge city, the city is mainly made up of shops. Like, there's just shops everywhere. It's just streets and streets of shops and houses and office buildings, and I find that being a minimalist within that, because my minimalist journey has taken me into looking at what I want to do with my life. What I want to do is go out and be in nature, and not necessarily go out and have to spend money in order to be out doing something. I don't want to go shopping. And living in London, that seems to be what most people do and how most people have their fun, and I find that that is the most difficult thing, being minimalist in my lifestyle and where I live. So because most of London is taken up with opportunities to shop and spend money and buy things, that is taken away from the space that used to be filled with parks and streets lined with trees and nature reserves and fields and hills. Those have all been ploughed down now to make way for more shops, and that is for me the most difficult thing. But I do understand that that is a majorly city dwelling issue, and that's not going to be the main problem for a lot of people, especially if you don't live in a big city. And I do expect that one day in the not so distant future I will leave London. Hopefully that will be coming sooner rather than later, and in which case the most difficult thing about minimalism might be something completely different when I take myself out of the city. However, I also do think that being a natural creative has kind of made some aspects of minimalism a little bit more complicated for me, because I see the potential in everything that I look at because of my creative mind. I don't just see an object as an object, I see it in the past, in the future, and what it could be, and the potential behind it, and then it lends me to think, well, if I just get that, then I could make it into something even more amazing. And this doesn't just go for buying things, this is something I used to do a lot. It was just collect things that honestly others would consider just 100% trash, like absolute trash. I wouldn't throw anything away at all. Like literally this goes for like old crisp packets, old newspapers, magazines, like actual rubbish I would keep, because I'd think, well, I could make this into a collage, well, I could sculpt this into a sculpture, I could use this in my art final piece for school, I could make a scrapbook out of this, what if I bake this, what if I melt this? And I would just, my mind goes crazy with what ifs and opportunities for things, and if I just throw it away then it's very wasteful. And I think that's actually where my zero waste living has come from as well, because I never would throw anything out because I'd want to upcycle it and use it for something different. And so that was very difficult in some aspects, and still is to some extent, because I see the potential in lots of things that I still have that I probably don't need. I would say that that is the most challenging thing when it comes to actual like physical objects. Also, this is kind of like a third answer to this question as well. I know it said what's the like one most difficult thing, but I'd say that these are all equally difficult in their different aspects, and that is, I often fantasize about just everything I own just like catching flame and being completely disintegrated and having to start over again. And in that situation, what would I repurchase? And probably not everything that I currently have now. And so I start thinking, well, what would I not repurchase if my house just collapsed or imploded or whatever? And although it wouldn't be everything that I have now, the things that I do have, I feel that if I use them and I am gaining joy from them, how could I get rid of them? So that is a constant battle between using something and enjoying it, but then not necessarily needing it. And do I really want to live a life where I just have one fork, one knife, one spoon, one bowl, one plate, one cup? And I think that the answer is perhaps one day, yes, I would like to do that, but currently in my situation now, and my living situation particularly, it's not something that is coming that easily to me right now, especially because I don't live alone. I live with 3 other people, one of which is my partner, and so I'm having to share like all of my space with somebody else, and that is often a challenge. So I think that in summary of that, it's not the stopping buying things and bringing things into my space that's a challenge. That was just very easy for me. I've never been someone to really enjoy shopping anyway. It's the having the things already and then letting them go is the more difficult side. The next question I got was, can you still have fun with colourful makeup and dyeing your hair and cosmetics and things like that and still be a minimalist? So again, like I said in the first question, it's not necessarily about the aesthetic. It is for some people. If it isn't for you though, that's okay too. And being minimalist is about downsizing so that you can find what really brings value and joy into your life. And if that value and joy comes from colourful makeup and colourful hair and experimenting with hair colour and being creative with how you look, and that goes for your style as well and your fashion, then absolutely you can still be minimalist because you have left in your life what is bringing you value. Minimalism is about getting rid of the things in your life that don't bring value to you in order to find the things that do bring value to you, and that is different for everybody. The next question is, how do you deal with living with absolute maximalists? So it's challenging, definitely, because we share a lot of the same communal spaces. I also have a partner who I share all of my spaces with, and the other people I live with who I share kitchen, bathroom, places like that are on the complete other side of the spectrum to me. Absolute, I would say, hoarders. And it certainly brings its challenges, but what I would say is that the people that come into your life and challenge you are there for a reason, and they're there to teach you a lesson. And I feel that I am definitely learning patience and compromise in my life at the moment, and those are 2 very valuable things to be learning. Those who test your boundaries are there to teach you important lessons, and I'm certainly learning a lot. The next question is, what one tip would you give to somebody who is completely new to minimalism? And I think that the most important thing to say to someone who's brand new would be to not compare yourself to others. A lot of minimalists online are showing the final result of their perfect minimalist home. They're not necessarily all showing the complete process from start to finish, and they're just showing you the final result, which looks amazing, and then often people end up comparing themselves and thinking, I'm not as good as that, or how can I even get to that point, and then not even wanting to begin because it looks very daunting to go from a life living with excess things to then thinking that you must throw everything out immediately and all in one in order to live just like them. And most of the time I'd say that they have gone through months, if not years, of a process, a long drawn out process of finding what works for them, getting rid of the excess things, and also bringing in things that are more intentional to them. So I would say, don't be overwhelmed with feelings that you have to throw everything out at once in order to obtain what somebody else has. that doesn't work for everybody. Saying that, it does work for some people. So you'd have to find what works best for you, and that's not necessarily doing things very slowly, step by step, and it's not necessarily throwing things out in one weekend either. Find what feels most comfortable but also challenging for you, without feeling overwhelmed and daunted by the whole prospect. So sometimes just ripping the plaster off works best for some people, and sometimes taking it a little bit slower works best for others. So I would say find the best way of downsizing for you, and start that today, whatever is the best way for you. The next question is, what first encouraged you to be a minimalist, and how long have you been minimalist for? So although I've always kind of had the minimalist image in my mind, even though I didn't know that that's what it was called, and I've never really enjoyed shopping like other people do, I did used to collect a lot of needless things. Like I mentioned before, I would just keep, almost with a hoarder mentality, things that I absolutely did not need or even particularly want. I think it was 3 to 4 years ago, I went through quite an emotional and mental breakdown due to lots of different situations happening all at once in my life, and going through the process of healing myself and seeking help, I really dug deep into my soul and just was discovering what I wanted from life, how I was going to get it, the process of getting there, my journey, my plans, all of that. And in shedding that kind of emotional weight, I also began shedding a lot of my physical items as well. I began realizing what was truly important to me, emotionally, physically, everything, and began pursuing that, while just getting rid of all the things that didn't matter and didn't hold value to me. I'd say within the first month I got rid of about 75% of my belongings, and I didn't tell anyone around me what I was doing. And at this point I was living with my mom at her house, and she didn't know what was happening and why all of these bags were being donated to charity like so much and all of the time, and why I was spending so much time in my room going through everything and decluttering. But it was a kind of therapy for me at the time, and still is to some extent as well. So I would say my emotional health journey definitely kick-started my minimalism journey, when I began reevaluating my life and deciding what I really wanted from it. And that is what minimalism is all about for me. The last question is, what was the most difficult thing to give up when you became minimalist? So the first half of the answer to this question is, I'm not sure really if there is like a time where I just like woke up and I'm like, oh, now I am minimalist. It didn't just happen. Like, I think it's more of a process and more of a journey than something that you just wake up and decide to become one day. It's not just like putting on a costume. It's a slow process, like becoming an adult. You don't just wake up when you're 18 or when you're 21 and you're like, okay, from today on I'm an adult. It's more of a process and a slow graduating change. So the second half of my answer is that I don't feel that I have given up anything. Of course, in the process of discarding items, donating them, giving them away, there is a sense of loss sometimes, because I do cathect items. Okay, my battery just ran out. Hopefully I can get this in the same kind of frame. So yes, the second half of my answer is that there is definitely a sense of loss, and I do cathect things, and I feel an attachment to things, as everybody does, which I recognize is unhealthy and not necessarily put in the right place. And so when I've gotten rid of those items, although sometimes the process is a lot harder than other times, I definitely feel a greater sense of relief that far outweighs any attachment that I had to an inanimate object to begin with. However, if you are getting rid of something that you feel this kind of guttural response to, that you really don't want to live without, then I would say don't get rid of that item just yet. If you find joy and value in something, then you shouldn't be getting rid of it. And maybe you will in the future, and maybe you won't. Maybe it is something that you hold dear and that you get a lot of value from in your life, and so I would say still challenge yourself, and if you know that you have something that you have an attachment to but you know is unhealthy, or that you know you don't use very often, or you could do perfectly fine with getting rid of, then I would say challenge yourself and get rid of it. There's not going to be a big life-altering disaster that happens because you've donated an item. Items are just things, it's just stuff. You don't need it. You'd be perfectly fine just stranded in the middle of nowhere in the woods. You'd still be alive, you'd still be breathing, you'd still be okay. You don't need these comforts, and although they are comforting, you don't need them. Keep what brings you joy, keep what brings you value, and you can discard of the rest. And like I said before, you can do that in one fell swoop. You can rip off the band-aid, and you can also do it more slowly. I have done it kind of a mix of both. So like I said, in the first month I got rid of countless, I have no idea how many bags and boxes of things, but that's because I find that at the beginning it's the most easy, because you have the most amount of stuff that you know that you don't need. The things that you have left are the things that have more meaning, and so as you go on, kind of the more difficult it becomes, although you also have this accumulated sense of relief, which helps you to keep going and eggs you on to declutter even more. So I would say if it gives you joy, keep it, although I would say be careful of the difference between true joy and falsified joy. Our brains like to trick us into thinking that we get joy from something that we don't necessarily. So that is a topic for another video. If you want me to go more in depth into what I'm talking about there, let me know in the comments below. I can definitely talk more about that. So let go of just what doesn't serve you. I definitely feel a great sense of relief when I let go of something. And I also feel a sense of growth within myself. So that doesn't necessarily mean that it's not going to be difficult, but it must always be for the greater good, because you're pursuing something bigger and greater. So those are my responses to my most frequently asked minimalist questions, and I want to thank you all for sending me in your questions on Instagram. If you're not following me there already, I will link that down below. And if you like this video, give it a thumbs up. I'd love to hear your responses to any of these questions as well, any of the thoughts that came up when you were watching this video. Let me know in the comments and we can start a discussion. And subscribe, and I will see you in the next video. Okay, bye.